Come. Hello. This is going to be my last sort of major video for a while. I'm going to do a wrap up next week, but I wanted to sort of do a kind of sort of think about how some of this stuff can be applied. Some of the stuff I've been talking about over the last few weeks can be applied, and I want to talk a little bit about history. And history for me is really important. You know, I studied history, but there's a period of history I didn't really study a lot, and that was the sort of like the Roman period in England and the British Isles, but mostly in England and Wales. But the Romans invaded, and they brought with them their religion. And for several hundred years, that was their Roman pagan religion. But then, when Constantine made the Christianity the official religion of Rome, then we became, by default, a Christian nation, and that was when Christendom began. And when the Romans eventually withdrew a few hundred years later, it left a vacuum, a religious vacuum, and some people say that vacuum was sort of like left until Augustine of Canterbury was sent by Gregory the Great to re-evangelize, England. But actually, there was already movements of re-evangelization, and it began with Irish monks coming over to the UK and bringing with them their sort of monastic traditions, and their job was to re-evangelize the UK, to re-evangelize them. They had particular effectiveness in parts of Scotland, Wales, England in terms of Cornwall and Devon, it was known as Dumnonia at the time, Northumbria, and so we get traces of some of their elements in the island of Iona, and Lindisfarne, and lots of parts of the Irish of Wales and even the Isle of Man. And so those are the ancient Celtic Christian nations, and that period of sort of decline of the Roman Empire, withdrawal of the Roman Empire, left a vacuum. And in many ways, the UK are in a similar position now. We've lost that understanding of, historically, Christendom has been the major way of understanding that I grew up very clearly that I was English and British, and that I was Christian, and that I was Church of England, and so very much a sense of the identity. But I imagine my daughter won't grow up with that sense of identity among her peers in her classroom. So we're in a vacuum at the moment, and there's lots of ways we could see this country re-evangelized. And I think re-evangelization for me is much more what we need than revival. Revival is the idea of bringing back Christendom in some ways. Not everyone would say that's their interpretation of revival, but for me, it's that golden age where everyone was a Christian. But actually, revivals broke out throughout Christendom. But actually, I think revival language struggles because of that reviving to that golden age, whereas I prefer re-evangelization. And I think UK needs to be re-evangelized. But I think we can learn huge amounts from those Celtic monks. I also grew up thinking that monastic communities were sort of hidden away, all these bizarre, often older men in monasteries, and obviously nunneries had older nuns and women, stuck away, disengaged. But actually, over a period of time, I've learned that the monasteries are a very engaged way of doing things, just very different from what I expect. But certainly the Celtic monks, that first of all, monasteries were not always male. They were male and female, or some were just male, some were just female, some were mixed, some were married. There was many different ways of understanding, the Celtics did, of understanding it. So they would, it wasn't just one way of doing it. But I'm fascinated particularly about new monastic movements, which is why I've been influenced a lot by Shane Claiborne and the Simple Way in the United States, in Philadelphia in particular. And for me, I think this is where to go. We need people to live new monastically, intentionally, and going not just to any parts, but actually into the marginal, the deprived areas of high social deprivation, real areas where the gospel, the churches are in massive decline, and the gospel is almost non-existent. We need people to move in to those places. And I think the new monastic thing interests me because, you know, the Celtic monks lived by a rule of life. They held fast to a specific way of living. You know, we sometimes get worried by the idea of disciplined living, but discipleship and disciplined, very similar words because they are from the same root. Discipleship is just disciplined. It's being a disciplined individual. And a rule of life is a really good way of doing that. The problem with most rule of lives is that they're designed for people who maybe are able to I don't know, I've never found them very easy, and most of them, most not to be easy, but particularly in the context of someone who is in full-time employment, particularly someone who has a young family, and has to give attention to lots of other factors. And the idea of, you know, 3 hours of contemplation every single day is almost impossible for me. It's like lucky enough if I get 20 minutes of Bible reading in the morning. And so I've created a rule of life that works. And I've put it on, if you look on Facebook, Dumnonia community, I've called it. And it's a rule of life that I think is a practical one for people to live by. But also, I think it's for people who want to live in community, in deprived areas where there is, as I said, high social deprivation, high level of need, and I think Christians need to get there first. Go there, live intentionally, live in community, eat together, meet together, and in the same way that those early monastic Celtic monks re-evangelised the UK. I think if we did that, if we saw a movement from the centre to the margins, people living intentionally, very integrated lives, living together, being together, living rules of life together where they're committed to each other and to the community. Do you know what? I think that might change the UK for the better. Thank you for listening. And as I said, there'll be one final wrap up next week. But thank you so much for being with me, listening to all the different videos I've put up there. If you've got any complaints or comments, please do. Love to hear feedback. And it's been good hearing some feedback from some folk. God bless.